There's also a really good breakdown that
I don't
Jesse
think I'm
Cox
gonna
did
play it. I
recently,
think I'm gonna wait for the next one.
comparing WoW and Final Fantasy. If you wanted to like
There's a what?
understand what a breakdown of like World of Warcraft versus Final Fantasy and like what differentiates them, like based on story and like why it's appealing to some
Ah,
versus others.
interesting.
And it's about I think like 15 minutes. It's a really good breakdown.
All right,
I
where's it at?
recommend
Link
watching
me.
that. Got you.
FF has always been intriguing, but I've I always know it's a deep dive, so I never touch it. Jar Jar, you big
But
Summit fan
honestly,
right
bro,
now.
the community for Final Fantasy is die hard, bro. They
Over the
they
last few
come
Yeah.
out,
months, I've
dude.
started to
If you're into the story, holy shit, bro. Have you seen Asmon streams recently? They come out in droves just for him to read that damn story.
Oh, no, I haven't seen him play Final Fantasy on his stream. Do people like it?
Yeah, dude, it's crazy. They're
To be
just
fair,
like,
Asmon's a different breed.
no, of course, like he's Asmon's Asmon. You're Summit, but that shouldn't stop you if you want to try it out. Just fucking try it out. Give it a whirl. Do some
He has
reading.
200K viewers playing Final Fantasy 14.
Day one, he did. He's been averaging like 120, 190K this week just playing Final Fantasy.
God, that's so fucking nutty. Let me watch this
Over
shit.
the
Let's
last
see
few
how this
weeks, I've
goes.
started to
Yeah,
notice
man.
a lot of familiar
Enjoy.
faces from the World of Warcraft community taking another look at Final Fantasy XIV. So today, I want to talk about the differences between these two games.
Damn,
that while sharing
man.
many similar
FF14, look how fucking good it looks, dude. For real. It looks damn good when you fucking stick it next to WoW.
concepts, diverge in their execution of the MMO genre.
And
As
WoW
a
doesn't
fan
even
of
look
both
bad,
games
it's
and
just-
15-year veteran of WoW, I've often thought about this subject as I now play through Final Fantasy XIV on a near daily basis since August of last year. I frequently get asked to compare the two, and the simplest way I've been able to do so is the following. World of Warcraft is an MMORPG, while Final Fantasy XIV is an RPG MMO. What does this mean besides hopefully sounding clever? In Final Fantasy XIV, the entire creative process, the direction, the core concepts, all of it are approached from an intrinsically different design philosophy than that of Warcraft. So it doesn't mean you can't enjoy both, it just means they're made for two very different gamers. Let me explain. I think most people have an understanding of what an MMORPG is beyond any sort of definition. There are expectations as to what that experience will be, which is why after playing Final Fantasy XIV, I've come to call it an RPG MMO. Because while all the multiplayer elements are there, I believe they aren't entirely necessary. If the MMO were removed and all we were left with was the RPG, the story, the music, the gameplay, it feels like the player would still have a complete experience. This is because the team behind Final Fantasy XIV, from its inception,
but I don't know if I'm gonna play Ash's Creation Alpha. I'm probably gonna wait for the next one, I think, White Bean. And thank you so much, man, for coming back through and end the dono, dude.
has
Yeah,
put
just
its
don't know.
focus squarely on storytelling. This design choice then influences every other aspect of the game, from characters to world building to music to animation, all serve to enhance the storytelling. It is without a doubt the single most vital aspect of Final Fantasy XIV. Everything comes from the story, everything is related to the story, and everything exists to service the story. So as we move forward in this video, you'll see every time I bring up a comparison or idea in Final Fantasy XIV, it's going to be in some way related to the story. And it's because of this one fact that Final Fantasy and WoW can still feel similar to a player moving between the two, but also be vastly different experiences. Let me just throw this out there. What was the story of vanilla World of Warcraft? If you had to think, it's because there was no story. There were quests, there was lore, certainly different adventures to get involved in, but no overarching story. There was no driving force behind what you were doing, besides the desire to gain levels, abilities, to see what's around the next bend or explore the next zone. The story of the World of Warcraft was what you, the player, made it. It was trying to find the right Zevras in the Barrens. It was sneaking into the undeveloped Mount Hyjal. It's trying to raid the enemy capital. Those were the experiences we remember. In fact, the most recent example of a great WoW memory I have is getting the Alliance Horde Slayer title and that achievement in BFA. The whole point is that you kill enough enemy players to literally be marked on the map as a bounty, and then people try to come kill you, and if you survive long enough, you get an achievement. It was one of the most exhilarating recent memories I have in the game. I loved every moment of it. In Final Fantasy XIV, if you ask someone their favorite moment, and I did, almost every single person is going to say theirs is related to story. Obviously, this isn't every player, as many players find the same camaraderie and accomplishment as WoW players when taking down harder bosses. But
do raid bosses mean anything? Like as in like the characters in Final Fantasy, like you trying to kill somebody who's a very big boss man that you've known in the story for a while, blah 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 blah. Or is it just random Joe Schmo shit? It is. Okay, it is all tied to story. Okay.
For the majority of players, the story is not just an important part of the game, it's also something that binds the community together. With that said, after years of playing WoW, to say there isn't a fan base for the world or story building they're doing would be foolish, as I am one of them. But let's be real, the majority of players simply do not care about the plot of Warcraft. I'd have to guess that's because it was never really the driving force of the game that got them playing in the first place, and more importantly, sticking with it. The fact is, as Blizzard moves more towards storytelling in their more recent expansions, they've developed multiple ways of getting across major plot information to players who may be interested, but it's not integral for the player's enjoyment. It's this delivery that provides the necessary surface-level context to keep a player engaged, but has also formed a complicated relationship with players who do enjoy story and world building in Warcraft. Team leads and devs change, shifting the vision for each expansion to fit what is essentially the rule of cool. While main story beats are planned ahead, it's very clear that things have changed or will change based on necessity. Main characters vanish, story elements are left behind, and lore is retconned to fit with the moment. As a big old lore nerd, years of that have definitely left me kinda jaded when it comes to WoW. A silly example is years ago at BlizzCon, I asked the devs about that weird snaketail and Gundrak. I was like, what is that thing? Their response then, and ever since, has pretty much been, we really don't know. Perhaps it was snuck in, perhaps it was dropped content, who knows? All I can say is, if it was in Final Fantasy XIV, that snaketail would not only have had a purpose, but it would have shown up 2 expansions later as an important character in an ongoing story. Yep, this is gonna be one of those videos that's long enough to be split into multiple parts. But it's good, because it allows us to dive a little deeper. When it comes to content, both games feature the staples of the MMORPG genre to differing degrees. Leveling, dungeons, raids, PvP, special events, grinds, and daily quests. In fact, some on the 2 dev teams are friends, and they definitely borrow ideas from each other all the time. Yoshi P, the director of Final Fantasy XIV, is notably a huge Blizzard fan. The difference, of course, comes from what the dev teams have decided the focus of their games should be. The best way I can simplify this is to say that Warcraft is more about the destination, and Final Fantasy XIV is more about the journey. As an example, in WoW, the leveling process in, say, a new expansion is a buffer between you and max level where the real game starts. I was once told by a friend that he always thought of it as advertisements for places that later on at max level you'll spend time grinding. Once you've leveled up, you can begin doing harder dungeons, farming gear in Mythic Plus, running raids, joining PvP battlegrounds or arenas, and doing your daily quests or grinding rep. And for years, this has not only been a pretty standard MMORPG cycle, but WoW has been the best at it. The goal, of course, is keeping players engaged and logged in. And going back to our original story discussion, doing most of these things continues the Warcraft story as well. In Final Fantasy XIV, it's a bit different. With the story being the most important part, this means leveling isn't just a rush to max level to experience the cool parts. The cool parts are the leveling. At max level, there are certainly raids and dailies and grinds and PvP, but they're nowhere near the complexity of WoW. Leveling up a job in Final
Dude, honestly, Final Fantasy looks fucking gorgeous, dude.
Experience the cool parts. The cool parts are the leveling. At max
I really like just that look. Maybe it's a little clustered on the screen, but I mean, like, just looks good. I like the textures, right? I like the
level, there are certainly raids and dailies and grinds and PvP, but they're nowhere near the complexity of WoW. Leveling up a job in Final Fantasy XIV isn't just about the leveling process either. Sure, and WoW you can level up an alt, experience the other faction's story, and a lot of people enjoy that. But in Final Fantasy XIV, each job has its own story and quests associated with it. They're varying in size.
That's right, one character plays
Dark
different
Knight, for
jobs.
example, is universally loved for being some of the best storytelling in the game. But again, story is what it's about. Most large-scale raids only have one difficulty level and are more events than actual team building struggles. Those raids and trials that do have harder modes are canonically fan fiction versions of the events, so players who are just there for the story won't miss anything if they don't have time for harder content. PvP, while vibrant, is nothing close to that of WoW. Reputations and dailies exist, but not in a way that forces the player to spend a significant amount of time investing in them. But you're rewarded in a way that makes it feel like you're kind of getting one over on the devs for the amount of time you actually put into it. Let me give you some specific examples. Let's talk reputation grinds. Admittedly, in WoW, I haven't played much beyond the start of max level content in Shadowlands, and this may be different, but if we look at most reputation grinds, it's usually something along the lines of like, you earn 750 rep a day with a weekly bonus of some sort, and you need 40 to 50k rep to reach Exalted. So you're looking at, I don't know, over a month of rep farming to reach max reputation. This, of course, is part of the design philosophy again, to keep you engaged in the world longer. In Final Fantasy XIV, while some of the older reputations are pretty similar, the newer ones, take Pixies, for example, are designed not only to be fast,
you really love
to feel
TBC that much
rewarding.
right now?
Every day you get 3 quests that take roughly 15 minutes to complete, and as a reward, you get tons of reputation, tokens that you can eventually buy rep items with, and then loads of experience. I'm talking like a quarter of your XP bar for 3 quests. And this is great because not only does it make grinding rep easy, but it also rewards you for doing it on one of your other jobs, incentivizing you to level additional classes. Let's take another example. Unlocking Flight. In WoW, unlocking Flight has always been a process, a thing that you really had to earn. Currently, I think to unlock Flight, it's something like getting Renown 44 and completing the last sigil and having completed Chapter 12 of the Covenant campaign, receiving memories to unlock account-wide flying, and then you can do it in Shadowlands. In Final Fantasy XIV, while exploring the map that you're already exploring anyway, you use a compass to find little green wind orbies, and when you find them all and you complete the area story arc, you unlock flying for that specific zone. It's not account-wide, but it's easy enough to get just by going through the leveling process. From a design standpoint, I love this. When I first learned this is how you got flying in Final Fantasy XIV, I was actually angry about all the time WoW made me waste. In Final Fantasy XIV, you get to experience the zone, which is what WoW's trying to get you to do, but 14 doesn't gate your ability to move through it quicker in the future behind some sort of grind. Which has probably got a few of you now thinking, Jesse, you're making it seem like you don't have to work for much in Final Fantasy XIV. But of course you do. There are things like fancy relic weapon grinds and stuff like that, but not nearly to the degree that WoW makes you grind out stuff. Honestly, I think we're so used to Blizzard making us go through content multiple times for months in order to unlock something like flying that anything less seems ridiculously easy. But that shouldn't be the case, gang. I don't know anyone who enjoys it, but we still do it. It all just comes down to the fact that the Final Fantasy XIV devs are not trying to keep you in their world for countless hours. So it seems like everything is a little easier. The fact is, the 14 devs have literally said they don't care if you log in every day. Get what you want from their game, come back when you want more. Instead, the grindy bits of Final Fantasy XIV are something entirely different. I recently saw this ad for Final Fantasy XIV, and it made me laugh, because I've never seen anything like this for WoW. But most Final Fantasy XIV players will tell you this is where the majority of your max level adventure lies. Look at this thing. Gathering, crafting, free companies or guilds, housing, fashion, the gold saucer, which is like a permanent version of the Darkmoon Fair. And I'll be honest, yeah, this is pretty much endgame in Final Fantasy XIV. That's not to say 14 doesn't have challenging content for those looking for a more traditional MMO raiding experience, but like, the point I'm trying to make is that in WoW, the endgame focus is on harder and harder raiding and mythics, PvP, both arena, battleground, and world, with all the other things in the game existing to aid in doing so. In 14, the endgame focus is more diverse. Although there are savage and ultimate difficulty raids designed for those who want a more challenging experience, there's also things like building a cool guild house, or crafting a special weapon from a weird boss drop, or going on treasure hunts. There's more to do than just raiding for the sake of raiding. Speaking of crafting, one of the biggest issues I have with WoW is that crafting for so long has seemed totally pointless once Looking for Raid was created. Any gear you could craft, say as a leather worker, was useless for those who could just get raid gear easily. Meanwhile, in Final Fantasy XIV, gathering and crafting is very much a major part of the endgame experience. If you're curious about other things, PvP for example, I mean, in this case, WoW definitely wins this one. There is PvP in Final Fantasy XIV in the form of war games, and there are many people who enjoy it. It's just that there's a wider variety and larger community in WoW. It is, after all, part of the core concept, faction warfare. This doesn't exist in 14. There are no warring player factions. In fact, much of the story is about getting all the nations of the world on the same team. The funny thing is, As WoW attempts to add more story, the PvP they're doing makes less and less sense narratively. And that's, just the tip of the iceberg of the endgame experience. There's a lot more to talk about, but since we are talking endgame, I think we should flip it and do the starting experience. Going back to the design philosophies of the two games, we can see differences in the premise of each and how it affects your intro into the game. In World of Warcraft, you start your experience as just one of the many faces in service of your chosen faction. Over time, your actions in defeating various threats increase your importance to the world. In Final Fantasy XIV, you are literally the Warrior of Light, the chosen hero from moment one. There is no denying your importance to the story. The entire narrative revolves around you. Even though initially you're not recognized as such, that's what you are. Quickly proving yourself to the world. From that point on, every character not only acknowledges you, but they recognize the importance of your role over theirs. So add that to the story being the most important element, and you'll see how this might be a daunting task for some new players. Much of the 14 starting experience it's pretty slow. World building, character introduction, lasting roughly the first 50 levels. I actually think this is one of the biggest problems Final Fantasy XIV has, as it's a hard sell to explain how phenomenal this game becomes only after you put in 40 hours. But that's exactly what I was told, and what I have told others, because it's true. The strong connection to narrative hurts the starting experience, especially for new players who may have friends playing or seen an amazing moment from a recent expansion, but they can't play it themselves without playing through 100 hours of story or paying for a skip and finding themselves completely disconnected from the plot. And that is a real shame, because the game uses all of that story and setup to build out the rest of the world. So if you skip over the starting experience, the amount of stuff you miss is mind-boggling. And because the story is so well told, and all the characters and locations and factions, etc., are so perfectly fit into the puzzle that is the main plot, that when twists happen, they make perfect sense. When reveals are made, it's like, oh yeah, of course! All because of that level 1 through 50 experience laying the foundation. And as I've said, I've experienced both ends of this. Years ago, when the game first came out, I gave it a shot, and around level 40, was totally burnt out. It wasn't until I returned last year looking for something new that I gave the game a second chance on the recommendation of a friend. I'm so glad I listened, because for a fan of story like me, what this game offers is a fantastic experience. Sadly, the reason behind Final Fantasy XIV: A Realm Reborn's slow start can be traced back to its origins as a reboot of the disaster that was the original Final Fantasy XIV. The budget was small, the timetable was short, and it shows. It isn't until the later patches of A Realm Reborn and the release of the first expansion, Heavensward, that the game truly shines. The production value skyrockets, the writing is less long-winded, the voice actors change, just about everything is better than where it started. And universally, everyone acknowledges this fact, which is why I assume the free trial, with memes and all, includes Heavensward. If you're gonna keep playing the game, it's the first expansion that's gonna get you. What's totally insane about all of that is only by sticking with it can you then truly appreciate the slow burn A Realm Reborn was, and all the ideas it introduces that later become very important. It's like when your parents gave you some advice as a kid, and you didn't listen, and now you're 30, and you're like, damn, that was good advice. I should have listened. But again, how do you sell that to people? Meanwhile, the WoW starting experience is much more welcoming to new players, because they keep updating it and changing it, a thing Final Fantasy XIV can't do without damaging the plot it's trying to set up. Because Warcraft doesn't concern itself with this. They now offer multiple ways to level, a special starting zone designed to teach new players. They have streamlined the process of getting your character to the end game, which, as we discussed, is a core design philosophy. But this means, depending on when you started playing, your story experience in World of Warcraft could be entirely different from another player. Some moments I may have experienced years ago are no longer in the game, making it so things that bind players and keep them engaged in the game are not story, but it's progression systems, guild dynamics, and faction conflict, which I think explains why people enjoy playing Classic, as it has all the things I just listed, but also a shared sense of existing in the same world, which I feel like, I think many of you would say, the current iteration of WoW does not have. Another way to look at this is how new content is delivered. If we look at the two most recent completed content cycles in both WoW and 14, the picture we get of everything I've been talking about becomes more clear. In WoW, the new content starts with the release of a trailer, A big budget, stunningly well made, sometimes shocking reveal. It's usually a way for Blizzard to show the first major inciting story moment. This is something like Sylvanas breaking
It
the helmet
baits us
domination
all into
or
buying
Deathwing
it.
destroying the world. Then, before launch,
It's
there's
so
a
good.
book and maybe some short stories about major characters involved in the next expansion. We'll get a pre-patch event, and then the expansion will release. And for the most part, every WoW expansion follows a similar formula. We get a short burst of main story.
I'm gonna take a look at that
before
picture in a
pausing
second,
for
Arkies,
leveling
okay?
content, and eventually returning to the main plot. Then a major raid is released, and the story for the main plot continues as we get a series of patches culminating in the last patch of the expansion and the showdown with the big bad.
He says he does
The cycle
photos
begins
in-game
again
for
with the new
Gil.
trailer. Because of its heavily story-based nature, almost all of the content in 14 is delivered in-game. So, in the previous expansion's 4th major patch, you'll get hints of a new story. By the time the 5th major patch rolls around, you'll have more information, important details, or new jobs will be hinted at. And then, around the same time, we get the trailer. Unlike WoW, it's not a single moment,
That's sick.
but a series of vignettes and a hint of things to come in the next expansion. Then at launch, the main story is experienced and completed throughout the leveling process. The first major patch and so on are there to wrap up loose ends, tell new smaller stories either via raid or a series of max level trials, or introduce new areas that serve as a way to grind out special.
I got a question. So what if somebody doesn't want to level up and watch all the vids and wants to go through like asmongold? How does he get through the raids for that story? Is he strong? Can he get strong enough to do those solo?
Special weapon skins. And then, by the end of the 3rd major patch, the story of the expansion is
I know you
wrapped
can
up.
buy a boost, but
And
for
then the
somebody
4th
who
patch
doesn't want to buy a
continues the
boost and
trend
just goes all
of
the way
hinting
through.
at what will be in the new
Finder.
expansion. So once again,
What's that?
And there's for your question about the raids.
Yeah.
So there's a group finder, and the story versions of those fights are significantly easier because it's like he said.
So
it's
people
to
are still
tell the
looking to
story.
play those. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, you also there's a thing called duty roulette. So people will sign up because that's like extra XP when they're leveling other classes, and it randomizes. It's random what raid they get and whatnot. So
Okay. Hell yeah.
there's always people queued up for stuff like that.
All right.
Yo, I've been
And
playing
I'm
for
sure
a
the
week,
obvious-
dude. I'm a cat girl and I love it.
What do you mean you've been playing for a week?
I've been playing all week. I'm a cat girl, dude. I look so cute.
You're a lying sack of butt.
I put the screenshot in Discord.
screenshot.
Look. Level 55, Dookie Brain. That's me.
Judd, can I pet you?
What
Yeah.
the fuck?
Okay.
I'm a cat girl, homie.
You're level. Wait, what level are you?
55.
Did you get there all by yourself? Like just leveling
Yup.
it?
Dude,
What's max level in the game? It's 80.
I don't know.
Okay, it's 80.
Dude, being
Have you,
like
have you
someone
been
who's
reading
like-
everything?
Yeah, I know the whole entire story. It's great.
Wait, did you boost? Or are you actually
no.
leveled?
Oh, I leveled.
It's
Hey,
great.
Trooper
Yeah.
here.
You
Dude,
think
if
it's
you've played
great?
MMOs, dude, if you played MMOs like your OG, that grind is literally fucking nothing. A week and a half.
What level
that shit is nothing.
did the story start getting good, Judd?
The story started getting good whenever you started fighting primals. Then it goes into like
Yeah.
a little dip, and then once you pass Titan, it starts getting good again.
That's the big wall for a lot of new players coming into the game is the Titan storyline because it's a little drawn out, but like that's when things start to pop off.
I'll probably just play
yo,
a tank.
I
If it's a
was- I was
PvE
actually
game, this might be
also-
the time for me to play a tank class.
Tanks is what got me into this game because it's so much fun, dude.
I'll just
I was
tell
also
Caroline
gonna tell
play
you,
healer.
you could tell Caroline, you want to get married in game, dude.
Oh yeah, there we go. That works.
And it's crazy when you get married. You have to design your venue. You have to create your invitations and hand them out to people.
Oh
You
my
get to
fucking
pick.
Lord.
She gets to pick her dress. You get to pick your outfit, dude.
Don't
It's
tell her these
nuts,
things.
and it's like a whole thing. Like people will come from different servers just to come.
I'm
to your
looking
wedding.
for her to fall in love with an MMO. You know what I mean? For a world, not just like it's not just you know.
This is it.
I don't know how to
I'm
explain it.
telling you, bro. This like if she likes doing all the other stuff and not just grind, like this is the.
I'm sure she'll
MMO.
like fishing and fucking doing all sorts of stuff.
The reason the Warcraft patch cycle is what it is to keep players engaged longer. So if you're a fan of story, for example, you need to keep with it through all the patches to see the end. While Final Fantasy XIV, designed to deliver story most of all, gives you a completed one at launch, then adds additional adventures afterwards. The most notable difference in gameplay between the two, I think, is to start, the global cooldown in Final Fantasy XIV is 2.5 seconds. So when you're level 10, for example, and you only have 3 abilities, it seems like there's a lot of downtime. Later on, as you unlock other off-cooldown skills or increase your stats to lower your GCD, this changes, but for the start, it definitely feels pretty slow. This also translates
so
into
good,
differences
though.
between the spell and ability rotations of the two games. Warcraft is more reactionary. Build up a bar or wait for a crit to trigger an ability, while Final Fantasy XIV is more proactive, where the player weaves a pattern of combos together to create a string of pre-planned attacks. Even the procs in Final Fantasy XIV are associated with patterns and planning. Combat in WoW is like a street brawl, and Final Fantasy XIV is like a dance. And because 14 is more of a dance, the combat is more spectacular, and the spell effects are way more flashy than those in WoW. And for the most part, spell effects aren't necessarily designed with large groups in mind, unlike Warcraft. So when you're in a 24-man raid and all the effects are going off, it can sometimes feel blinding. So much so that there are options in 14 to decrease or turn them off for other players. Speaking of making changes to the game, 14 has a pretty amazing HUD customization in the base game. While you can do a lot more...
Can you just make it so you see only your shit on them and not everybody else's, or...?
The various add-ons in WoW, 14 gives you enough tools to customize your experience so that you don't feel the absence of add-on support. This UI customization allows for the use of a controller, which the game was designed with in mind, allowing for cross-platform play between PC and PlayStation. This allows for some pretty fun player interface options and looks.
Is there
letting you clutter
cross-platform?
your screen with as much information or as little as you want. And we can't forget about the accessibility of players who simply can't use a mouse and keyboard.
You can play your
Accessibility
PC
can be
character
found
on
in 14 in
PlayStation
the
if you
form
want.
of universal language on markers and effects. I'm sure that as you've watched
shit,
this
okay.
video, you've noticed in the Final Fantasy XIV segments the same
That's
markers
probably a
on the
big
ground
deal and
over
how
and
it's,
over and over
pretty
again,
popular,
to the
too.
point where
It's a
players can
fucking
have
console
some
game.
idea of what's coming their way based on the effect.
raid
They
after
understand
killing
what's
the
about to
hardest
happen and what's
boss
required.
last tier together
Another
also,
major
he's
gameplay difference,
kidding
which
about
is
that.
probably what we
Dead
should have
and
started
chill
with,
and
is
grind
the
on
ability
all
for
fun.
one character to play every job or class in the game and switch between them. If you choose Black Mage to start, for example, like I did, and you end up hating it, like I did, then you can switch to another job and try something new. Fall in love with something new, like a Red Mage, or a Warrior, or a Dragoon, like I did. And 14 is designed with this one character leveling multiple things in mind. WoW, on the other hand, is designed around having to create multiple alts to try different classes. But unlike 14, each of these new characters has some sort of racial ability or special action, and 14 doesn't have that. It doesn't mean you can't level alts in 14, but it's unnecessary to experience all the game has to offer. Warcraft does, however, have more overall combat diversity, with the option to choose talents and spec out your character in fun, weird ways, although a lot of the time people just look up what the best is. Also, the classes in WoW
Me too.
seem more wild and vibrant compared to that of Final Fantasy XIV. There are no Demon Hunter or Brewmaster analog, for example. It does have a Blue Mage, but it's treated as more of a joke class with wacky overpowered abilities that isn't really allowed in current content. Also, WoW really nails raiding and PvP. It's what the game was designed for, and they do it very well. The raids in WoW are larger and more intricate, the PvP is more varied and complex, but Final Fantasy XIV does something very fun with its dungeons, raids, and trials by including synced, unsynced, and minimum item level settings. You can change the difficulty of a dungeon, for example, to be exactly how it was when you first ran it in your low-level gear, or to cheese the hell out of it at max level. The last thing of note is that when crafting or gathering, 14 is much more visual and complex than WoW. It's not just clicking a node. They're actually separate jobs, separate skills, separate stories, and separate gear that you can play without ever doing the main story. Although you'd need it to unlock some zones, there are whole events built around using these crafting and gathering jobs. Building a city, for example. And as I mentioned before, crafting actually makes viable gear, unlike WoW, whose crafters are mostly useless once people can do looking for raid. You're gonna get tired of hearing me say it, you probably already are, but story plays a major role in the aesthetics of 14 versus WoW as well. Both games look very good, let me be clear, but they each have their own visual style. WoW is slightly more cartoony and exaggerated, everyone has giant muscles, even the fat dudes and the gnomes. 14 is a bit more subdued in all regards. Even the colors are more toned down. Some might call the character designs a bit anime. Meanwhile, the WoW character designs are more diverse than 14 as well. Trolls, undead, humans, pandas. In 14, it's more like human, tiny human, cat human, horny human. The biggest difference I've noticed
Boob
comes
slider.
down to 14's emotive characters and WoW's wider array of visually diverse zones. These emotive characters make it so 14 can easily work in numerous in-game cutscenes and match the voices. In order to do the same thing in WoW, custom crafted scenes are made, which take time and limit the number that can be included. That's not to say that Warcraft characters can't show emotion, or Final Fantasy doesn't have visually diverse zones, but each does their thing better. WoW can get more wild with their visual design because they aren't limited by players on older consoles. The PS3 version of 14 was still available until 2017, which means the PS4 version will be limiting players for a few years still. Because its limits are fewer and the devs can update and change their graphics more frequently, WoW can create a more wild, outlandish, and visually striking environment for players to explore. And because 14 was started with storytelling in mind, characters' faces are designed to show a wider array of emotions. WoW, on the other hand, added story after the fact, so the game wasn't designed to have a lot of close-up facial animations. So as they add new in-game cinematics, many of the ones we're getting now seem to have these weird, flappy jaw yapping things going on. And that stands out from the other higher quality cinematic stuff we're used to getting in WoW. The music of these games is also another thing worth pointing out, as it again is a perfect example of my original thesis. Like the graphic design of the games, they both have good music. But similar to WoW's visual style, Final Fantasy XIV's musical style is far more diverse and wild and fun. In Warcraft, music is mostly ambient, used to set the mood of a zone or dungeon, usually something catchy, repeating, and not all that intrusive. But many times, because of its generalized nature, there are moments where it might not fit the events that are on screen in an epic boss fight, for example. There's plenty of times I remember struggling through a raid to get to the final boss and the music was pretty much the same as when I started the raid. Meanwhile, in 14, because the music, like everything else, is connected to the story, it's more moment to moment than WoW. Again, it's not like WoW doesn't do story moment music, or Final Fantasy XIV doesn't have ambient zone themes, but they both do their own thing way more. Final Fantasy XIV has musical themes for sad moments, and happy moments, and silly moments, and tense moments. It sometimes even tells a story. There are theme songs, and leitmotifs, and more importantly, battle music.
Yeah, let's hope not. It's kind of whatever, I don't know. Probably because you only hear just the music and not anything else going on.
Oh, it'll grow on me.
It's just so good. Nothing makes wiping or learning a fight more tolerable than a catchy song in the background. Truthfully, Final Fantasy XIV just has a larger variety of music and uses it better than WoW, which is crazy because I remember listening to the soundtrack for WoW Legion and thinking how great it was, only to find out there were some songs not even used in the game, or if they were, I don't remember or missed it. I recall multiple versions of Anduin's theme, only for him to barely be involved in the main Legion storyline, and his theme to show up like maybe once or twice. That's so crazy to know they have all this amazing talent at Blizzard making music, and they don't even use it all? And remember Elite Tauren Chieftain? Final Fantasy XIV has a band of devs called the Primals, except they don't just do meme songs, they play like all the hits from the game, lyrics and all, and let me tell you, they got some bangers. The difference is, while ETC was phased out of live events, the Primals are the highlights that everyone looks forward to. It's as if the WoW community thought ETC was kind of lame, and Final Fantasy XIV fans are like, more Primals, please. So there's one last thing to talk about, and I'm sure it won't be controversial at all. The communities. I've been in the WoW community long enough to have formed a pretty substantial theory about it. I know I'm going to get lots of crap for this one, but I think the general notion is that it's pretty toxic. Yes, your personal guild might be awesome, but generally, I think we can all agree there are high levels of toxicity in the WoW community. And I believe this stems from the nature of the game itself. WoW is based in conflict, a game where two factions are pitted against each other from the beginning, so players already have an established enemy or other to focus their ire on. It is thematically ingrained in the community culture. And not only is player versus player part of the game, but so is competition on a PvE level, with world firsts and server firsts and more at a macro level, and then tools like DPS meters at a micro level to determine who is the best in the current party. Everyone is judging everyone at all times in Warcraft. It can feel overbearing. Even WoW's more cooperative events can seem like competition between players. As players are in the game longer and learn more and think they know more, biases form, opinions, valid or otherwise, take root, and soon the forums are littered with waste. You know, toxic. 14, at least in my experience, has been different. And it's hard to explain because, sure, there must be toxicity in the community. I've heard of it. I've never seen it. And maybe that's streamer privilege. Maybe it's just I'm very lucky. I don't know. But most people, if you ask, will tell you how nice and wonderful and kind the 14 community is. But it's also jarring. If you're a WoW player coming to the Final Fantasy 14 community, there's a lot to understand that's different. Let me give you a great example. Rare mobs, or in the case of 14, ranked mobs. In WoW, if you see a rare monster, you find a way to kill that thing as fast as you can, you grab friends, you grab guildies, you want that special drop. In Final Fantasy 14, that's frowned upon by most of the community. I found this out one day when I saw a rare and asked my free company, my guild, for help. And they were like, dude, wait for the hunt train. And I was like, what? What the hell are you talking about? It's right here, right now. And they explained, that's not how the community does it. When all the rares are finally spawned, hunt trains form, and like 100 players move from zone to zone, killing them, each getting credit for the kills and any sort of rewards. This idea baffled me.
There's gotta be some people that
I
go
am here
against
right
that grain,
now.
though.
What if I'm not online later? I have to pass up the kill just cause? And they were like, yeah.
I'm about to yoink that shit, dog.
I know it sounds crazy, but having done multiple hunt trains now, I understand it completely, and I actually prefer it. It's almost like if WoW had this same concept, I may have actually seen a time lost Proto Drake once or twice. Warcraft eventually had moments like this for Nashtadar and Mechagon, but it's not on the same level. This camaraderie in the 14 community translates to how they treat new players for the most part as well. Sprouts,
So
as they are lovingly called, are new players with a little icon next to their name. Normally, one would assume an icon next to your name letting everyone know that you have no idea what you're doing would seem like you just got yourself a scarlet letter and became a pariah. But in Final Fantasy XIV, it's the exact opposite. Instead of trolling or treating them poorly, most players cheer them on or offer advice and tips in dungeons. It makes it easier to understand if someone has no clue what's going on. You can instantly see they're new, and it's okay. And the game even rewards players with bonuses for having them in your group. And that's what I think is so special about the community in 14. I've seen plenty of players try new classes or a build or whatever in both WoW and 14. And people can get intimidated about being yelled at for sucking or not knowing something. But in 14, that little sprout icon lets players know immediately that you're newer to the game. So they have an expectation that you might not know some things. And it makes it easier to ask, which is honestly the biggest problem in WoW. New players are always afraid to ask what to do. Just as an example of how this mentality rubs off on you, I was doing my 14 roulettes or dungeon dailies and got the final Omega raid. When it popped, I was in a group of almost all sprouts. For those of you who don't know, this fight is what you would call a complicated dance. We wiped. A lot. And in my guild chat, I was cursing up a storm. I was so upset that I had to go through this thing that I thought was going to take me 5 minutes, but I'm here at like minute 30. But in party chat with the sprouts, I was like, we can do this. Come on, I'll teach you how to do this fight. I've often thought about what sprouts in WoW would be like, and the only thing I can think of is that it would mostly be people dropping from parties that they showed up in. Again, this isn't to say the Final Fantasy XIV community is perfect. Obviously, assholes play all sorts of games, but the general nature of the player base seems a bit more relaxed. Yes, someone will tell me I'm doing something wrong while I stream, but that's every game, for everyone. The biggest difference, I think, is the Final Fantasy XIV community does not tolerate a lot of the stuff that WoW does. The crackdown on bad actors is swift and immediate. And some of you may be like, well, that doesn't sound cool. I guess for the people who don't want to deal with that stuff, it's pretty cool. I don't know. The last big takeaway I have on community is this. The WoW player base seems always ready to attack their game, even while loving it. And the Final Fantasy XIV community is always trying to defend their game, even if it doesn't need it.
Stuff depending on who uses it.
Oh gosh.
So you've made it some 30 minutes into a YouTube video and you find yourself here. This was all just sort of a long-winded way of saying again what I'm sure I made clear.
Lemon break for a Dragoon. Sorry, I didn't see that one. Huh? OSRS negative. Kind of cool.
And a healer limit break 3 in a raid, they res everybody.
Do it. Be a proud weep. Play the boob slide again.
I put my boost slider to the max on my character.
Healer, res everybody. Is that a big meteor? That's pretty cool. Final Fantasy XIV, huh? We'll keep it in the back of our mind. I'm gonna mention it to Caroline, see if she thinks, and see if maybe we'll gander into these videos and see if we like them.